Thank you everyone for being here today. Yes, I'm the moderator, Sunitha, and I'm just going to say a couple of things very briefly before turning it over to the speakers so we can maximize our time with them. All four of our speakers are from the arts and culture side of the creative economy, subsectors whose inclusion in the creative industries, some critics and scholars have called into question, given the vastly different needs and challenges these subsectors face compared to industries like film and design and animation, which is basically an inability to compete in a market economy, therefore making them dependent on government subsidy or private patronage and philanthropy. They are a vital part of our cultural and creative landscape, but many practitioners during the COVID pandemic found themselves having to justify their relevance when the pandemic hit, and to speak up in order to not be forgotten in the strategies for economic protection and revitalization. But of course, we persevere. Our speakers also represent different roles within the ecosystem. We have Fiona Menzies from Creative Partnerships Australia, which is an intermediary organization that provides support to the sector. Leo Silitonga and Joseph Gonzales are both founders of arts organizations in the visual arts and performing arts respectively, or rather in Leo's case, it's an arts platform as a festival, and Joseph is also an educator. And finally, we have a representative of a government agency, Melanie Huang of the National Arts Council of Singapore. They are going to be speaking in this order. Each will speak for approximately 7 minutes in response to the theme and questions we provided in advance, which basically is, we invited them to share how in their respective country or context, the creative industries have mitigated the negative effects of COVID-19, and if they could, offer some insights into the recovery strategies taking place. We also asked if they could comment on how the various stakeholders, not just corporate, but also government, civil society, play a role in this recovery, and if they feel in their context there are gaps or yet unfilled needs. We invite questions from the audience. Please make use of the Q&A feature if you're in the Zoom webinar, or if you're on Facebook, type it in the comment section, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. Please go ahead and enter the questions as you think of them. Don't wait until the very end. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say. I'm now going to invite Fiona to kick things off. Fiona.
Thanks, Sunitha. So in Australia, our First Nations people have a tradition of welcoming people to their country. If they're not on their own country, they do an acknowledgement of country to show respect to the traditional owners of the land, and non-Indigenous people do this too now. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to our shared future. So today I would like to give you an outline of how the COVID pandemic has affected the arts and cultural sector in Australia, and what has been done in response by the sector itself, by government, and by the business and philanthropic sectors. For some context, Australia is a federation, and so much of what has happened here has been a result of that system and what powers lie with each level of government, particularly our Commonwealth government and our state governments. One of the things that has happened here is that our state premiers have used their powers to shut their borders to people from other states. So movement around the country has been very limited over the last 18 months. Those states who have not had large COVID outbreaks have shut their borders to states which have had COVID outbreaks in order to keep the virus out. And those states with significant outbreaks have imposed severe restrictions to lock down their communities in an effort to suppress the virus. The result of this is that the pandemic has affected arts and culture to varying degrees depending on where you are. In some states, there have been minimal disruptions and they have continued to operate, although the border closures have restricted them to using local talent only, which of course has been great for local artists, but not sustainable over time for audiences. In states where there have been prolonged lockdowns, the sector has been mostly shut down for the last 18 months and will only restart in 2022. And within those states, there is also a distinct difference between the impact on different parts of the sector. The larger performing arts companies have been hit the worst, as they rely heavily on box office as a major part of their revenue, whereas visual arts organisations, galleries and museums have not had such a big hit to their income because government support is a larger proportion of their overall revenue. Galleries and museums can also close down and open up relatively easily, whereas the performing arts have not been able to rehearse, making re-emerging after a lockdown period much, much harder. My state of Victoria has been hit the worst, and Melbourne has the unenviable title of the world's most locked down city during this pandemic. So the arts and cultural sector here is feeling tired and frustrated. They just want to get back to what they do best. And I note here too that the number of COVID infections in Australia is minuscule compared to many countries around the world. In Victoria, we have had our worst day on record today, as it happens, with almost 2,300 new cases. So you can see that our governments have taken a very conservative approach, which in some ways adds to the frustrations of those hardest hit, such as the arts and cultural sector. So what's been done in response to the pandemic? Firstly, the Australian government did three things. It funded 2 programs specifically for the arts sector, a $50 million rescue fund so that arts organisations who were facing insolvency as a result of loss of income could apply for relief. And also a $200 million fund to ensure that arts organisations can re-emerge from the pandemic with new work to display and perform. And we will begin to see the results of this over the next 6 to 9 months as those things start to be displayed. Also, early in the pandemic, the Australian government put in place a scheme for all sectors called JobKeeper, which was a kind of wage subsidy scheme, which enabled employers to continue paying people when they weren't earning income. This helped keep a lot of arts organisations afloat. And while it was accessible to independent artists and creative workers, it did not capture them all, often to do with how they operate as contractors. So there was still a gap. This is where philanthropy played a role. A group of philanthropists, led by the Maya Foundation, one of our largest foundations, set up a fund to provide emergency relief to independent artists. This was done very quickly, and my organisation, Creative Partnerships, was able to assist by ensuring donations were tax deductible. We also supported tax deductible donations through our Australian Cultural Fund to already existing benevolent funds that had previously been set up to support artists in need. Arts organisations have advised us that their philanthropic and business supporters have generally continued to support them throughout the pandemic. In the first instance, donors and partners got in touch to see what additional support arts organisations might need. And while businesses were unsure at the beginning of the pandemic about how it might affect their own revenue, as time went on, many discovered they were not adversely affected. And so they worked with arts organisations to reframe their partnerships. As most events could not continue and much activity turned to digital delivery, arts organisations and their sponsors together worked out how they could provide mutual benefit in this new environment. This has ranged from very simple things, such as a wine company delivering a bottle of wine to the homes of supporters to drink while they watch a program launch or a concert online, to performing arts companies providing video conference presentation tutorials for sponsors' staff, and to more sophisticated digital branding campaigns. In the early days of the pandemic, the sector itself had a mixed response. There are always a few people who are sort of frozen, not knowing what to do, while others get on with adjusting to the new environment. In some cases, it forced organisations to address things like their digital strategy that probably should have been more advanced by now. So the pandemic forced them to progress these strategies. One fantastic initiative that I want to share with you has been the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall, a platform set up by 2 musicians in Melbourne to support artists broadcasting concerts for payment. This provided and continues to provide a source of income for musicians when they could not perform in real life. To get it started, they received seed funding from some donors and have expanded enormously. So now they are working on a business model that will support their growth. And I think that will continue well beyond the pandemic once people are still going back to concerts in person as well, because it's reaching new audiences and for all sorts of reasons. Another interesting initiative has been in Adelaide, where an Australian businessman who had been living and working in Hong Kong decided to return home when the pandemic hit. And whilst he wasn't working, he decided to create a new venue for Adelaide for artists to use to both collaborate and to perform. Called Light Adelaide, he and his wife bought an old heritage building and transformed it into this new arts venue. Again, it's something that might not have happened had he not made that decision during the pandemic to return to his hometown. But what else needs to be done? And is there an opportunity for the business sector to be part of that? I would say absolutely yes. One of the things that has become apparent is that the majority of arts companies do not have the skills or expertise to fully implement digital strategies. This is one area in particular where I think the business sector can help. So rather than, or preferably in addition to providing cash support, I hope that we'll see businesses support the arts in the form of providing expertise, particularly to smaller arts organisations that can't possibly hope to have this capacity themselves. And I'm sure there are many other opportunities such as this where businesses can partner with the arts for mutual benefit. And before I finish, I just wanted to share one other piece of information with you. We have a research organisation here called A New Approach that does research specifically into the arts sector and where it fits and where arts policy fits in our community. And their latest piece of research has been about young people's attitudes to arts and culture. And one of the main findings of that has been that young people see arts and culture as integral to their lives, to every aspect of their lives, whether it's their private lives, their work lives, and so forth. So I think, if anything, that is a real call to action for businesses to work out how they can contribute to that, because I think younger people will demand that more and more over time. I might leave it there. I could go on forever, Sunitha, but I know I've probably already gone over my time.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I'll just move right on to Leo. Can you please go ahead?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Leo. I'm founder and fair director of Art Moments Jakarta, an art fair that canceled its 2020 editions last minute due to pandemic. And this year, we have done one online with small scale offline art fairs in June 2021. And we are preparing for the second one this year in November 2021. Canceling an international event last minute cost us lose money. The event was supposedly launched in April 2020, and we decided to postpone the fair early March. We have spent major non-refundable expenses already. Even like one of important art event in Jogja, Indonesia, Art Jog, supposedly opened in July for 2 months this year. But during those time period, COVID cases was at the highest, and government had to apply strict restrictions for events that gather a large number of people. We barely survived in year 2020. We have to think creatively how to survive. We are not supported by government grant. We Indonesians are used not to rely on our government when we have problem with our businesses. And we also understand that our government has other major priority on managing the pandemic. So we look into industries that was not impacted by the pandemic creatively, even becoming very attractive, these industries. We had rare plants or luxury plants exhibitions and webinar plants that are priced between $1,000 US up to $20,000 US. At the time, the $20,000 US plans was not sold. But a month ago, the nursery who collaborated with us managed to sell the plant to a Vietnamese buyer for $100,000 US. I personally collected rare plants mid 2020 and already managed to sell some and made profit. So that's the thing that we are been doing as Indonesian. We have to think creatively how to survive during this pandemic. But still, our core business is art. How to maintain relationship with your stakeholders, such as art galleries, collectors, and artists. So early 2021, we changed our business models. We focus more on how to get more sponsors. We try to get to know what do they want, because if we want to focus only on fine art, it is a very niche market. Need to engage with bigger market to attract sponsors, especially during the pandemic. So we offer ways to penetrate the biggest market in Indonesia, which are millennials and Gen Z, Generation Z, to our candidate sponsors. These generations have different ways of appreciating art. They are into urban art, sneakers, custom collaborations. They prefer to spend 14 million US dollars of cows, the Kim Sun's paintings, over Picasso. And then this year, they make a fortune from becoming YouTubers, trading cryptocurrencies, influencers. They have amazing spending habits. It seems like the pandemic didn't affect them all. This year, art market was surprised by the auction result of NFT art Beeple, sold at 69 million US dollars at Christie's. A lot of NFT art collectors made easy money this year, and growing number of NFT collectors. Conventional artists tried to test their luck by minting their artworks in blockchains or making NFT art. Easier to sell, easier to make money. Pessimists try to make their argument saying that NFT art is not art, it won't sustain, etc. But hey, these are the market that we want to penetrate. These are the market that a lot of company wants to reach out to sell their products. We are not going to badmouth what they like. So that is how we got support from private sector, such as private banks. Like we got sponsors from Tesos, Singapore office, etc. How to introduce modern art to millennials and Generation Z if they are not exposed to this kind of art. This generation prefer to visit sneakers exhibitions compared to art fairs. Indian Indonesians are not educated as museum goers, and sooner or later, the second and third generations of the wealthy Indonesians will take over, and they have their own preferences. So next year, we are planning to have physical art fairs. There will be a lot of adjustment, definitely. I still believe the old model where thousands of people will gather at the same hall together will not be in demand. The nightmare of people died during the pandemic will still haunting and make people extra cautious. We are looking at second semesters to do these art fairs like September. We are still not comfortable arranging big events early 2021. We want to see how the third wave go if we are experiencing this third wave. A lot of people saying that it will happening at the end of this year. So in other words, being part of the creative industry world, we have to be creative in every situations, make the best use of what we have. That's about it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leo. Joseph, would you like to share your experience?
Yes, thank you. So let me look at and share with the audience gathered here where I come from and what I am doing with the dance company in Malaysia. It's called Ask Dance Company. We were established in 2011. It's a full-time private dance company. I'm the founding director. Imran is the managing director, and Kimberly, the deputy director. So our tagline is Dancing the Malaysian. And primarily what we do, well, in the normal times, was to provide performances, dance workshops, and classes through our center. And we have actually performed extensively, definitely locally. And we try our very best because one of our missions is to bring Malaysian art to the international platforms. And so that has always been one of my dreams and one of the things that we invest a lot of time and money. And we've been to several countries, as I've written here: Korea, Hong Kong, Spain, Japan, China, Vietnam, And so this is all exciting part of the growth of the artist and their experience as well. And in the last 10 years, we have achieved considerable presence in the Malaysian environment and ecosystem for sure, winning innumerable awards. And I think this is really about keeping the artist on the edge and keeping the artist excited about making work. And I think this is one of the most important ethoses of our company, and that is to always keep trying to do something that is beyond what they normally or are used to. So our portfolio of services. So this is it's kind of an unusual format in Malaysia because most professional companies in Malaysia are government run and government funded. So ours is one of the very few private funded that has a full-time staff of about 11. When I mean staff, I mean dancers, and they all multitask and they do innumerable types of work, which is unfortunately what they have to do because we just can't afford it any other way. And this is a large part of what we do is to bring purpose performances to venues, curated for special events and so on. And so we try to do the kind of work that we want to do. We also participate in festivals and so on whenever we can. Our work is both traditional and contemporary, as you can see. So we've done some market research about who the people are that come to watch us, and they're students from primary and secondary school, tertiary level students, academies and universities, private studios, owners, just dance lovers, corporates, and these are the people that would generally come to our performances. And you must understand, our performances also, when we held them, were not in very large venues. The venue may be seated about 400 people at the most. And these are our outreach programs. This is really a large part of what we do, and one of the most important things that drives me to do the work that I do with the company. And that is to provide employment for the dancers, the full-time dancers, the people who have spent at least 5 to 6 years training to achieve a very high level of quality and standard in their work. And what we do is we want to teach the young. We want to go out and teach all Malaysians about the beauty that Malaysia has in our traditional dance. And over the last 10 years, this is the kind of work that we've done. We've reached out to more than 23,000 people in venues from Perlis to Sabah. And, it just warms my heart when we used to be able to do this. But of course, then the pandemic came, and then we had to really change our mindset and the way we worked. And for me, working in Hong Kong, where I am right now, was very valuable because right from the beginning, we learned that we need to rethink how we're going to bring dance to the students here at the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Art for Performing Arts. So what we did is we did a lot of e-training. The teachers had to be trained in how to do this. And the students then would access all this material either synchronously or asynchronously. So we, in Malaysia, in the company, we worked on producing documentation, guidebooks for the outreach and e-learning project. And this was so incredibly time consuming because we had to work from scratch and get the photographs, the documentation, and so on. And, we tried very hard to get, we talk about millions of dollars that we spend on artworks. And here we are charging a minimum of 10 ringgit, ringgit for somebody to come and do class because times are bad. And the people who really want to do it are often dancers who want to keep training, and they're the ones who can't really afford to pay even more money to continue being trained, you see. So this is what we did. We offered Zoom classes, and the most important thing that we've done in the last 1 year in response to the pandemic is forging traditions, training the trainers. And what we did was to all this to online training. We focused on training teachers so that we could actually then have them educate a lot more people. We had 1,727 participants and over 9,000 views of our tutorial videos. So this is the achievement of this year, and we want to continue for this year. And importantly, at this platform, none of this would have been possible if we didn't have the support of our guardian angels, the Yayasan Saim Dabi, who have been with us for the last 10 years. And basically, their investment is approximately 300,000 per year. Chandana has come on board with the grants that they've given us with another 100,000, and Creator is a new, smaller sponsor of the work that we do. And here we are, and this is really important. The only way we can carry on our work is with corporate and government support. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I was skeptical that you would speak, very quickly, given the number of slides, but brilliant job. You only spoke for 6 minutes. Our last speaker is Melanie. Melanie, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Sunitha. So hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today to share with you how arts in Singapore has been impacted by COVID and how the Singapore National Arts Council, NAC in short, has been working with the sector to sustain it through COVID. So many of you agree with me that the response to COVID is a whole of government effort. Many government agencies have to work together not only to keep people safe, but also sustain businesses and livelihoods in all sectors. So despite these efforts, however, arts venues have had to close and live performances have had to be cancelled. So arts groups and artists found themselves having to pivot quickly to digital performances that was in 2020. So as a champion for the creation and appreciation of arts in Singapore, the NEC reacted quickly to secure more help and more funding for arts and culture sector. And this was the $75 million Singapore dollars in the form of Arts and Culture Resilience Package that was introduced last year. It was 55 million, and this year, 2021, given the COVID situation, we topped it up to another 20 million to be 75 million. And the purpose of this fund was to sustain livelihoods and provide work opportunities and build capabilities in the sector so that we could all emerge stronger from the pandemic. So this help went out in the form of grants in many areas, such as digital presentation, capability development, and more recently this year with the Self-Employed Persons Grant for SEPs to work together on good projects and for arts groups to transform themselves under the Organization Transformation Grant. So these are more recent efforts that we have had, and this is really on the back of a recovery from last year. We feel that we need to do more to help arts organizations and artists this year. And to help artists and arts groups tide over the most difficult period, we also had rental waivers and also venue rental subsidies in place. So far, the $75 million package has helped to create 12,000 jobs, as well as training opportunities. And it has also helped with 680 digital presentations projects to be able to be put for audiences to enjoy. And the programs that NEC supported has reached out to more than 33 million viewers. But the role of the government does not stop at funding support. The government also helps by bringing together important stakeholders in the ecosystem for the arts organizations and working with these partners, such as media, through commissions and partnerships to present the works of our artists. So Singapore also launched a nationwide campaign called SG Culture Anywhere to bring together the digital works of our artists and arts organizations on a single integrated platform so that we can have better outreach to audiences. So all these plays a part, bring together people, bring together the works in a way that individual arts organizations cannot do so on their own. So maybe I'll just stop here. We have more time for Q&A and we'll give more examples in the Q&A session. So back to you, Sunitha.
Thank you very much, Melanie. That was very brief, just a couple of minutes. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in already in the chat, but I think what I'll do is maybe start with a few questions in response to what you said, but also to expand and give you the chance to expand on a couple of ideas. Thank you all for your sharing, and again for being very short and succinct. That was excellent, but now it means that we can ask you more. So actually, Melanie, maybe I'll just stay with you for a while because you spoke so briefly. And this is a question that I would then also include Fiona in. I think the difference is very stark here, where we have countries like Australia and Singapore that have described multi-million-dollar packages to support the arts industry. And then we just heard from Leo how he said in Indonesia, they really can't depend on their government, while acknowledging that the government also has more urgent needs with the COVID pandemic. And Joseph also has not, I mean, he's mentioned Chidana, which is a form of government support, but he, you know, they really benefited more from the private kind of CSR corporate philanthropy. So from the Singapore side, could you maybe share a little bit how the NAC works with other sectors, with the private sector? Because otherwise it is quite taxing on the government to bear the brunt of this completely, isn't it? Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so maybe I could just elaborate on one initiative that I personally found as a man on the street, you know, enjoying the arts, basking. So the baskers, much of this basking activities was suspended in 2020. So they slowly got back to being able to perform. But what happened in the downtime in 2020 was the NEC used this time to work with baskers to organize pilot sessions. We trained them to be able to perform and engage with audiences online. And that was done with the help of a private company that, and also I think it was through online presentation platforms. We brought in people to explain to them how do you use such media platforms to present your performances. So that's an example of how government can bring together the artists as well as the people who can help them do performances online. So that's one example of, without naming specific companies, you know, how we have brought in private companies to be able to help our artists level up to the new normal. Yeah. Sunitha, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, thanks, Melanie. Fiona, so you did share a little bit, I think, about how the businesses have been involved, right? But you also said towards the end that you think there's more opportunities. Perhaps you could expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, I think in Australia, probably 30 years ago, businesses would sponsor the ballet if the chairman or the chairman's wife liked ballet. And over the last couple of decades, that's changed quite a lot. Companies have been much more responsive to shareholder desires and also to their staff and other pressures on them. So sponsorship has sort of moved from that kind of chairman or CEO's office into marketing and has become very marketing driven. And I think that's made it a lot harder for arts organisations to come up with that kind of mutual benefit side of things that satisfies those people in marketing, because they're sort of weighing up, you know, I could spend this amount of money on an ad on TV, or I could sponsor this arts organisation. The sort of decision-making process is very different. And I think arts organisations have perhaps been a little bit slow in sort of putting themselves in the shoes of the business to think of what really are businesses looking for. But I don't want to blame the arts organisations, because I think it's very much a two-way conversation. You know, sometimes businesses are not very forthcoming about what it is that they want out of a partnership. So I'd like to sort of see, and creative partnerships may be able to play a role in this sort of getting better conversations between the two sectors and better understanding of what each of their needs are, because I think that will lead to much more fruitful and satisfying partnerships for both parties. And what I would say, back to what I was saying earlier, is that the arts sector here has reported to me that they've had a pretty good response from their sponsors during COVID, but I think that's the ones where they've got that good relationship. I think sponsorships that were very transactional, you know, you'll give us this much money and we'll give you this many seats on opening night, they perhaps haven't lasted through the crisis as well as partnerships that are much more meaningful than that.
Thanks. That's a really good point, a very important point that I think that we have to bear in mind. And if there are representatives from corporations that support the arts listening today, I think, I hope you're going to reflect on your relationships, because if you, as Fiona's saying, if there isn't that understanding of the needs of both parties, it will be very hard for you to adapt and move on. Joseph, maybe we can have you share a little about your experience with your guardian angel. You mentioned that it's been a 10-year relationship, which obviously means that there's a lot of mutual understanding and appreciation. Maybe you could share a little bit about specifically when COVID happened and the recognition that it's not business as usual. How were you, what sort of negotiations did you have to have with your corporate partners?
Yes, Yayasan Sime Darby actually has reached out to so many local arts groups, Five Arts Center, KL.CEF, other organizations that are recipients of grants, large grants from them, sustained over a period of time. But with the COVID pandemic, very quickly, because Hong Kong responded so early, they were really quick in their response. I believe it was sometime like maybe February of 2020. And also because Hong Kong has the experience of the SARS pandemic a long time ago. So really their knowledge of how to respond to these situations was quite admirable. And very fast, I connected with my team in Malaysia and I said, look, we must forget about traveling anywhere. Just do not even think about it. Do not even make it a plan B. It's not going to happen. What we are going to focus our energies on is how we're going to translate this into preparing an online program that would be very comprehensive, knowing, of course, all the shortcomings that online programs have. And then we designed that program and informed, planned it in great detail about how people would register, where they would get the information from, what kind of booklets we need to do. So it was highly intricate and detailed. And then we presented it to Sime Darby to show them that, we have thought about this. This is what we want to do. We need your support to continue. And then, of course, you have, Andrea Bocelli singing to 40 million people. You have this wonderful orchestra happening in Italy of people from their balconies, and, arts saving, saving the sanity of so many people in this period of time. But I do want to say very quickly, adding on to what has been very exciting conversation here, is an observation that I have in that we have Sime Darby, and I love them dearly, but they're not really going to do the whole job, right, of funding us. I mean, we are 10 people, and when you divide the amount of money by 11, excluding me, it's still really not very much. But when I want to approach other funders, it is really a challenge, because in many ways, they see us as the Sime Darby baby or the Sime Darby voice. And therefore, it is quite hard, to get other people to come on as patrons, because they kind of, corporations like to have exclusivity. There's one thing I want people to take away from this, the corporations, I think this is a shared responsibility, and more corporations that get on the bandwagon to support the artists. And we are happy to put everybody's logo on there and tell everyone how wonderful you are. And, I think it's not one person that can solve the problem. So yes, to answer your initial question, Sime Darby was very understanding in how much we really want to continue this project because of its benefits, and that we had a plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. This is a question that's directed to all the speakers, responding to what you said. In your respective contexts in Jakarta, in Singapore, in Kuala Lumpur or Hong Kong, and I think, Fiona, you've got a very nationwide perspective, right? Are these corporations talking much to each other, in your knowledge or in your experience? Are businesses the businesses that are have an interest in the arts in supporting them, whether as philanthropists or some other kind of creative partnership, are they speaking to each other? And I think Fiona did mention the importance of conversations. So also, if it needs to be a facilitated conversation, who's doing that facilitation? Would anyone like to respond first? Yeah, Fiona?
If I go first, I would say I don't know if the companies are talking. Do you mean if the businesses are talking to each other?
Yeah, so, Joseph described being seen as the Sime Darby company, and that creates a certain barrier for other companies to support them. But also the fact that if more companies would share their experiences or interest in the arts, that could also perhaps lead to more productive relationships.
I definitely agree that peer-to-peer influence is a really good way of having influence. And, you know, an example of that was this fund that was set up, started by the Maya Foundation, who is one of our oldest foundations, is very influential. So when they knock on people's doors or ring people up and say, you know, we're going to put this much money in, would you put a bit of money into this? People are much more inclined to do it because of that peer-to-peer influence. So I think that definitely works. Within the business sector, I don't really get a strong sense that, you know, the head of one of our mining companies is, you know, regularly chatting to the head of our telecommunications companies about their arts sponsorships. However, they do talk to each other, and I've recently had a conversation with the CEO of one of our biggest companies, and he said, we were talking about what they do sponsor in the arts and, you know, whether they should do more or less or whatever, and he said to me his primary concern as a CEO is shareholder value. And that's fair enough. That's what the Corporations Act tells him is his main responsibility. I guess it's how you define what that is. And I would argue that companies don't exist in a bubble, and their staff and other stakeholders don't exist in a bubble. And if they want to live in a, you know, thriving community, arts and culture is obviously a really big part of that. And going back to Joseph, what you were saying before, definitely in Australia, there's a feeling in the arts sector that the pandemic has really shone a light on how much people rely on the arts and culture. You know, we've all got a lot more spare time now that we're not commuting and going out as much. And what are we doing? We're listening to music. We're doing arts and crafts ourselves. I've got into basket making. We're watching lots of screen. We're reading books, all of those things. So the arts feel as though in a sort of bizarre way that the pandemic has really shone a light on how important arts and culture are to everybody's lives. And I challenge you to find me a person who can't say they've done at least one of those things during the pandemic. But back to the conversation with the CEO, I think there is some recognition that they do want their companies to be operating in thriving communities. That, you know, that helps them make more money too. And I do think that whilst I don't think, you know, Mr. Mining Company and Mr. Telco Company, and in Australia they're mostly men, sadly, that they're having that conversation at that level, I do think what's happening is if an arts company has several different sponsors, they're in a really good position to, through the events and things they run, bring those sponsors together. And there may be things that those sponsors can then discuss them doing together. So that's another benefit for sponsors. You know, if you've got a company that's an arts company that's got more than one sponsor, it can play a role in bringing those sponsors together for business purposes.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else, any of the speakers? Yeah, Melanie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add actually that we, in the area of donations and encouraging philanthropists and giving to the arts, actually the Singapore government, I think since 2014, we've been having the Cultural Matching Fund as well. And that has seen a total of $650 million coming from the private sector and philanthropists for the arts sector. And that's important to keep up. There was a dip last year, but this year it picked up again. So what we do, I think this peer-to-peer conversations, not so sure if they're happening, but what is definitely the government, in the government's ability to do is actually to give recognition then to philanthropists and patrons of the arts, so that they are able to continue this effort, this good effort they're doing, you know, be seen for the good work that they are helping with in the arts sector. And then I just want to latch on to an earlier point about how moving forward, maybe giving to the arts is not just about giving money. I think that's important. We need to expand on that and maybe work that into strategies both of the government and individual arts organizations. How do you work with donors or philanthropists who can give more contribution in kind? Maybe it's about giving space, which is also sometimes a very expensive thing depending on which city you're in. It can also be about giving expertise or networks. So these are things perhaps we need more from people sector, the private sector. for the arts sector. And both the government and organizations can play a part in trying to bring in these resources for the arts sector.
Thanks, Melanie. Would Joseph and Leo like to add anything, or shall we move on to another question? Yeah, we'll move on. Okay, so I think now we'll start responding to some of the questions that came in either through Facebook or Zoom. And one of the first questions actually was directed at Leo, but I think we can also broaden it out, which was to do with a kind of ecological consciousness and environmental issues. So the question was how to balance the promotion of art and selling art with environmental issues, given that there are concerns about NFT not being eco-friendly. Acknowledging that you are not an expert on NFT, but do you have a response to that?
Actually, I do. Our collaborations with institutions related to this NFT, we collaborated with Tezos. Tezos is when you're talking about environmentally issue related to NFT, it relates to when artists minting the artworks, and it's gonna be using a certain cryptocurrencies, while Tezos actually claim to be one of the environmentally friendlier currencies compared to the other currencies. So yes, we understand that there is an environmental issues related to this NFT art, but it's more into which cryptocurrency that we are the artist is using to minting their artworks. So I think that's the only explanation that I can give related to how to balance promoting art with environmental issues related to NFT art.
On the topic of environmental consciousness, I know, Fiona, in Australia, there are lots of concerns with mining companies. So how is that affecting the way the arts and culture sector chooses to work with such corporations?
I think it's pretty mixed. I think there are definitely people who are very uncomfortable with that or strongly object to it. But I think there are other people who are more sanguine about it, and I guess they think, you know, they've got money to give, we'll turn it into something really good. And actually, when you look at a lot of established foundations, whether it's in the UK or America or here, you can often find that the original money that was made, possibly many decades ago, wasn't made in very nice ways. So an example would be the Doris Duke Foundation in New York, which is it's huge and it gives a lot of money to the arts. You know, it was made on tobacco using slaves was how they made their money. So do you go, well, I'm not going to take their money now? Or do you say, let's do something really good with that money now? I tend to err towards the latter, but I respect people who have a different view. And I guess what we advise arts organisations to do is to always have a policy about who they will accept sponsorship from or not, so that when something controversial does arise, they can go back to their policy and make sure that they've, you know, met their policy objectives and that they've thought about what their values are and what they're prepared to do and not prepared to do in advance, rather than it sort of hitting them at the wrong time. In relation to mining specifically, my view generally is, unless it's illegal or harmful to people, don't, you know, take their money. And whilst I will acknowledge that some miners sometimes do the wrong thing, I don't think all mining is inherently bad. And it's often young people who are objecting, and I say, if you don't want any mining, take that phone of yours and throw it away, because without mining, you don't have that phone. So I think people, you know, there's arguments both ways, and I think it's all about having respectful conversations.
Thanks. I think the world that we live in today, there's a social reckoning that's happening everywhere, and certainly in the arts and creative industries, we can't avoid this. But that would be a whole other conference, I think, to be talking about that. But thank you for those responses. Another question that came in the chat was, the person says, there are some great operational examples here. Given, I wonder in what way COVID has positively informed the corporation about, well, I think they mean, the companies in general, about the malfunctions of creative economy policy in your respective countries. So do any of you have thoughts about what has been happening in the past year and a half to almost 2 years now has exposed some perhaps gaps or deficiency when it comes to the support of your sector at a policy level? Maybe go ahead.
Maybe I could just do a quick response to that. I think I would prefer to look at it from the perspective of opportunities, or, and one great example is how, I believe all countries have been pushing their businesses to go digital, leverage on the digital economy and all that. And what COVID just did to all of us is really give us a burning platform. You have no choice, you got to move. And that really definitely accelerated some of that growth in that digital economy space. And I think perhaps what it also indirectly gave us is, and the artists, is an opportunity now being digital to reach out to wider audiences, international audiences. Really, the world is your oyster now. You're no longer confined geographically. That could be one way to look at it. So if it has been about internationalization, if it has been about digitalization, actually COVID did help us along in those journeys. Yeah, that's how I would respond.
Yes, and many people have acknowledged that actually this was a gap, right? The focus on digital was something that many arts groups knew they should be doing, but they just hadn't. So you're right about this being an opportunity to expand that. Joseph, what about in your opinion? Do you think that there are some gaps, or as the person who posed the question put it, malfunctions?
Yes, I echo the opinion of Melanie and realize that even, let's just talk about choreography, for example. For the longest time, we've been talking about virtual reality. We have been talking about using augmented reality as part of the choreographic process. And, in the past, extensive amount of money, for example, is spent when you have to transport artists transnationally. But now the COVID has allowed us to let's not worry about where we can go and where we can't go, but let's see what we can do here, working with an artist and artists from across the world. And that has actually opened some very, very exciting possibilities creatively. And it's a long journey. I mean, it's not something that we can come up with instantly, but there have been great examples of people like William Forsythe and people like Wayne McGregor, who have actually been using very scientific approaches in programming improvisational tools, in programming choreographic methodologies that have been very, very exciting. And in a way, the pandemic has actually forced us to look at this very seriously. So I also echo that point of view. However, I think there is that sort of visceral enjoyment of an immediate audience reaction to your performance that we cannot take away from, and we desperately still want, as much as this gives us a new platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. Leo, what about in Jakarta?
Actually, it's the same like what Joseph was saying, that everyone trying to replace the physical interactions to digitals, but still they are forced to getting used to that kind of to these digital things, because like Joseph says that arts, to appreciate arts, to appreciate the paintings, we still want to longing to be able to see the painting by ourselves, because the impact will be different. Especially nowadays, there are a lot of art installations. How can you appreciate art installations by looking at through a digital platform? It's so difficult unless we're using this virtual reality, VR, mask, Google Mask and everything. But it's still, the cost of the Google Mask is still not affordable yet. Maybe later on, when it's already affordable and everyone is able to have this Google Mask, this digital replacement, the replacements of physical interactions to digital is getting more and more happening in the daily life. I think that will be and then again, but again, for this the generations, the millennials and Generation Z, they looks like they are careless about being about the this pandemic, because nowadays there are a lot of clubs, there are still hush opening, and there are a lot of people, young people already having parties there. So that's the things that we would like to penetrate, the people that are not really scared, I mean traumatic about this pandemic situations. So yeah.
Leo, I am the mother of 21 and 19-year-old girls, and I can tell you,
I have a 21-year-old girl also, Fiona.
First opportunity to get out, they will be out there.
Yeah.
I think that's quite heartening to hear, because I think there has been concern amongst older practitioners that who are, an older audience is used to being in the theatre. You're used to the live experience. So when things reopen, you flock back in. But I think there has been concern that for younger audiences who haven't yet developed that experience and appreciation, they will be glued to their devices and you lose a whole new audience for the live experience. But I think what you're all saying really shows that human beings are also unpredictable. COVID was unpredictable. Nobody could have expected such this global pandemic on such a scale to happen, for the world to grind to a halt, right? No one could have predicted that. So I think at this stage, perhaps adding a little something to this question, I think policy is going to have to catch up and respond to what's happening. I don't think we can really point at gaps, because there's so much that's happening that we didn't expect. And we also have so much that's unpredictable in terms of how we're going to behave. Audiences are going to behave. How are people going to behave, right? Okay, we do have 10 minutes left. And so I'm just going to say this to the audience. If you do have a burning question you want to get in, you better type it in right now. There are a couple that I'd like to acknowledge that I did see your questions, but I'm not picking them up to respond to, because I don't think some of them are so suitable for the panelists. But because you've written them there, hopefully the people that are responsible, I think ministries, one question was directed more to the ministries and agencies. Hopefully somebody will look at it and know that these are the kinds of questions coming up. So the last question that I would like to highlight now is another kind of practical question. Can you share what, in your opinion, arts companies or organizations would need to consider in building, I guess, newer relationships, given the context now, building relationships with corporations, bearing in mind, of course, that everybody is affected. So I think they want to maybe hear some tips about how we might be able to proceed into the future, not begging and not insensitive to the realities. Who would like to start first with a response to that?
Sunitha, maybe I'll jump in. I think it has been, a lifelong sort of education for myself. Discovering how I would need to approach organizations about what I think they would like to hear, and also for them to hear very clearly what I as an artist am passionate about. I think our vision and our passion can speak to corporations, and I suppose my own experience is sort of testimony to that. But to keep trying and it is very, very exhausting for artists to keep doing that, if you look at, Five Arts Centre in Malaysian examples, they're 30 years old, 40 years old, but they still do it, they still talk about what they want to do, where they come from, where they're going, and so on and so forth. In the Hong Kong context, I think they are a little bit more progressive because they really have the Hong Kong Arts Festival itself is 40 years old, I believe. So there is a presence of understanding what the arts is. They're constantly developing spaces in all across this city for people to make art accessible to people. And I think it was Melanie or Fiona that spoke about spaces and how spaces are made available to the artists and so on. I think this is something very important, but the artist needs to think also about what kind of art they need to do to would then speak to the specific corporation if that corporation has a specific sort of agenda. Educating ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Joseph is saying. So Sunitha, if I could go next, yeah. But for me, perhaps it all revolves around value. And it doesn't always have to be in the value in dollars and cents. It's about the value of arts to the society, value of arts to a people. So I think that's something that we have to help people see. And it's not just the role of arts organizations. It is also perhaps the role of councils like the National Arts Council to try and help people understand where is the value of arts, what role does it play in our lives? Without it, what would we be? So I think it's the value that we'll need to underscore some of the relationships that we'll be building or that we need to sustain.
Can I just add to that as well, Sunitha? I would actually challenge one of the assumptions in the question, because I don't think all businesses have been badly affected by COVID. In Australia, supermarkets booming. Funny bit of info for you here in Australia, because we haven't been able to travel and people haven't had money to spend on travel. There are a few things that have been doing really well. Car sales, hugely up. People are buying a new car because they can't have a big holiday. Keeping in mind that travelling from Australia anywhere costs a lot because it's a long way. Visual arts, actually, art dealers are having great sales because everyone's stuck at home. We're all locked in home, so we want our homes to look nice. Again, we've got savings, so we're spending that on art. So I don't think all businesses have done badly in COVID at all. In terms of the relationships between arts organisations and businesses, one of the things I like to do is arts organisations often feel that they're somehow inferior. And I like to say, no, you've got to put yourself on the same footing. You've got to say, we've got something just as valuable for you as you've got for us. I think it's really important to put yourself on an equal footing with people that you're seeking something from, that you're not the sort of sad junior partner in all of this. And I do think that as much as there are lots of things that businesses can teach to arts organisations, I think there's a myriad of things that arts organisations do exceptionally well. We do huge things on tiny budgets, number one. We get stuff done on time because opening night is opening night. We don't sort of delay the product launch for 3 months because we're not quite ready yet. There's none of that. There's a lot of stuff that we can do. We're problem solvers because often, if you're doing something on stage or installing an exhibition and you come across a problem, you think, oh, how am I going to do that? So we're problem solvers. All of these things are things that businesses can learn from. And so I think it's really important when you're building those relationships, make sure you don't get put in a kind of junior position. You're on equal footing with these people. And I think it's really important. The other important thing to remember is that people that you might be dealing with when you're building that relationship with a business, they might have had very limited exposure to the arts. I come from a background where I was surrounded by every art form my whole childhood. So it's second nature to me. But often I'm having conversations with people and I realise they've never been to the theatre before, or they've never been in a an art gallery before. And so you have to be aware that you're introducing these people, and you've got to do it in a way that's not intimidating or doesn't make them feel silly because there's something they don't know. All of those things I think are really important in building those relationships. Don't assume things about people.
Thank you, Fiona. Leo, you get the last word, 1 minute.
Okay, I totally agree with Fiona. I think not all corporations affected by this pandemic. All you need to do is get out from your comfort zone, knock more doors, differentiate knocking and begging. Because I mean, begging something to do with your ego. You're like, because you have to lower down yourself, asking, and then you think that it's begging, but actually it's knocking. And if they said no, it's so beat it. I mean, try to knock another doors. I mean, you have to work extra miles during this pandemic. You cannot be as comfortable as before the pandemic. So what I'm trying to say is there is a way if you are thinking creatively and willing to work harder. That's it. I think that's about it from me.
Thanks, Leo. I think that was great. So we have reached the end of our session. And I would like to thank all the panelists so much for joining us today, for sharing your personal experience, your professional experience. I want to also end with a statement that Fiona mentioned about companies and corporations wanting to operate today in a thriving community. And that's what arts and culture does. And I think we need to all bear that in mind. Hopefully, if there are corporations listening, that's resonating with them. But for all of us in the arts as well, lots of practical tips you've heard from the panelists. We don't need to be humbling ourselves and begging. We know that we make an amazing contribution. We just have to be confident in saying that. Thank you very much again. Thank you to the audience for listening, and have a good afternoon.